What's happening, everybody? How the hell might y'all be doing out there? Watching that waistline or what? Trying to be productive? Play some double paradiddles? Some patty fla-flas? Get out, stretch, run, exercise? Keeping it going? Keeping it positive? Keeping it motivated? Maybe not, right? Today's guest is drummer Bryan St, who plays in Hum, and who just released their killer new record, Inlet. So check that out if you haven't already, and I'll include a little clip of the record of the non-YouTube version of this episode. But definitely great catching up with Bryan and talking about said record as well as the 90s. And for repeat listeners, you probably know that, of course, I love the 90s, so good times were had, and definitely awesome talking to him and picking his brain about those times and these present times in which we find ourselves. All good stuff. Shout out to my sponsor, New Orleans Record Press. If you're looking to print vinyl, go on over to NewOrleansRecordPress.com and check out the mini vinyl coloring, electroplating, packaging, mastering options. They'll even give you assistance with design, and you can get a real-time quote from that real-time quote generator there. So they can hook it up, and that's NewOrleansRecordPress.com. I'd also like to take the time to remind the listeners to keep their eyes and ears open for movements like Bailout Funds and Save Our Stages and so many other charities trying to help out those in need. And if you can buy some merch or look out for lessons and classes from those musicians you dig as well, they could very well use it, I imagine, in this time. Crash Bang Boom Podcast can be found on my SoundCloud and YouTube pages, as well as Google Play, Podbean, Stitcher, Luminary, and more. Check out my Facebook and Instagram pages for additional content and updates. Please give me a like, a follow, a subscription, whatever it is. If you could, the support is appreciated. All right, everybody, here we go. Bryan St, Pere, Hum, Inlet, album out everywhere. Shit rules. Get up on it. Crash, bang, boom.
Crowds go mad with joy.
All right, Bryan St, Pere of Hum, what is happening, man? How are you doing? Congrats on this new record, Inlet. I think it sounds awesome, and I look forward to talking to you about the writing, recording, and all of that. But how are you doing? How is Hum doing? And yeah, what's going on in your world these days?
Well, I'm doing all right, and thanks for having me on. This is pretty exciting stuff. I don't get to talk about drumming much, so I appreciate this invite.
Yeah, man.
Things are going relatively well. Playing a lot at home, but not playing out much. I don't know whether or not we're going to play out, following this weird time to release a record. We wait 22 years and then release a record at a time where we can't play any shows or do anything about it, which it makes the decision-making process easier, because it's just like an automatic no. So,
right. Yeah.
You don't feel like a jerk for turning on shows for a change.
I know. Oh my God, man. Did Hum have any touring plans that got postponed indefinitely, or PR with the record or anything like that? What happened with that?
Well, nothing happened because nothing was really planned. These days we're kind of like the Steely Dan of the rock community, because it's just like doing this stuff in the studio was challenging enough. We really hadn't put many plans in place to do any official touring or play any shows. Just kind of go into it with the mindset of if something pops up that sounds appealing, we might do it. But none of us, we're all getting along in the years, and getting up on a stage in front of a lot of people doesn't have quite the same draw as it once did. It's still. Mm-hmm. It's still fun. We did the Dia de los Deftones thing
right
back in November, and that was it was fun and it was worth doing. But I just can't see driving around for weeks at a time, eating Taco Bell and being tired all the time anymore. I think touring is a sport for the young,
right.
And we're not young anymore, so. We'll see. If something comes up that sounds fun, and we're not worried about getting a bunch of people sick in a few months, maybe.
Right. Right on, man. Well, from talking to fellow drummer Jason Gerken, who obviously played with Hum in 2015, he talked a little bit about Hum's stage volume, and it sounds like it's pretty cranked on stage as a band. But I think the interesting thing about the album Inlet is that I think y'all really benefited from a modern big production, and the final product is awesome. So again, congrats on that. But firstly, I guess when Jason was playing in 2015, I guess, had you left the band or were you just on a hiatus then to just rejoin? What was that phase?
The phase was basically that we hadn't done anything in a long time as a band. You know, other folks in the band decided they wanted to get back out there and play some shows, and I wasn't in a place in my life, mostly like professionally. Like I had and have, you know, a full-time job that really isn't conducive to taking, you know, weeks off at a time to tour in a rock band, and also at the time I didn't feel like, you know, musically, I don't know, valid, potent, virile. I didn't feel like I had much to say that I needed to say in front of a bunch of people anymore. Mm-hmm. So the idea of touring didn't excite me at that point in my life. I was, you know, going through some personal stuff with a marriage and all of that as well. So I kind of had to focus on keeping things together in the home front as best I could.
Yeah.
And even suggested to the guys that don't let me hold you back at all, and actually suggested Gerken as like the first guy they should try, and awesome that it worked out. It was crazy hearing him play with them. Is kind of both I don't know if humiliating, that's not the right word. It's just like he pulled off a lot of stuff that I wish I could have pulled off. It was kind of crazy to hear him like read my mind, and if I had more speed and dexterity and agility, you know, that I would have done. But, you know, I tend to stay home more often than go off. Mm-hmm. And it was just awesome hearing them go off to some of the faster songs and all that. I actually went to the first show, and I didn't even tell them that I was going to go, but it was in Nashville.
Nice.
And it was intense. It was so great. I'll tell you, the best part was like hearing, you know, my band from the audience.
Yeah, right.
Few people get to ever, you know, do that, and it was pretty great.
It's awesome.
Yeah, and Jason's like such a good dude, and he just killed it, you know.
Absolutely.
And that new Shiner record is like unreal.
Ah, it's so
dude.
Good. Yeah, I love it that you both Shiner and Hum put out records. It's a blast from the 90s, man. It's awesome.
Yeah, and it's, you know, the weird thing is it's not intentional. Like the timing, like it's not like we waited around for the right time to put out a record, you know? It's more just like it just kind of naturally happened after a lot of years. Like, why not? It happened. I mean, we made it happen, of course. It's not like it happened, you know, on its own, but it wasn't planned. You know, it wasn't a strategy. It's just when it ended up happening.
Gotcha. Well, with writing the songs that ultimately became Inlet, I guess tell me a little bit about the writing of that. Where are the guys presently, and then where are you? I know you're not. You're in Indiana right now, right?
I am, yeah.
Gotcha.
I'm in Evansville, Indiana. I moved here about 20 years ago for a job.
Right.
And the other three guys, Matt, Tim, and Jeff, are still in Champaigne, Illinois. So it's about a 3.5 hour drive through the heartland, through the farm community.
Yep.
And it's a drive that I've made literally hundreds of times over the past 5 years. But the record, it's been sort of just a really casual, gradual process where I'd drive up there and Matt Talbot, the singer, guitar player, owns a small studio in Tolono, Illinois, which is just 20 minutes outside of Champaigne. And
nice.
I just drive up there a weekend and hang out, and we just, kick around some riffs and see how things sound. And it was just slow and not very, stressed, not very intense. It was just casual. Mm-hmm. And then once we came up with a few things that kind of sounded halfway decent, we'd start recording what we thought would be sort of demos or just works in progress. And as it turns out, a lot of the drum tracks were actually pulled from the earlier stuff, like from us just trying out a song. Mm-hmm. And that's mostly, it's not because I'm like Mr. Awesome, like early one take guy. It's kind of the opposite. It's once we got like further down the songwriting process and I started putting more pressure on myself to be, perfect. Mm-hmm. For me, that's the kiss of death. So it turns out that the stuff that ended up feeling better and sounding better to us was the stuff that I recorded earlier on when the songs are still kind of new and fresh and before I had a chance to overthink them.
Right. I'm absolutely with you. Yeah.
I think that's how Neil Young always insisted on recording, is like he'd just like introduce a song to a band and he'd start the tape rolling, and as they were still learning the song, that's where he thought the energy was best. And that's kind of how it worked out with us this time.
That's awesome.
For the drums. Now, for everything else, they had that luxury of, you know, taking their time and all that. But for me, most of the earliest stuff was the stuff that we ended up keeping.
About how long ago would you say you recorded most of what became the drum tracks on the record?
Like 2017.
Wow.
Like 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, it's been a while. I mean, we don't do anything fast, and we did this all ourselves, so there was never any pressure from, you know, producers or labels or anybody to have any deadlines. We just, you know, we've all got day jobs and families, so it took a long time. And it's not like it didn't take a long time because we were, you know, tweaking it to death every day of every week. It was more just like we would just work in like bursts and then not do anything for like a couple months.
When it came time to mix the record, who mixed it? Because, I mean, obviously the tracking was there, and it sounds like some of the spontaneity of those first takes and what you did is there. But who mixed it? Because, man, I'm telling you, it really sounds great.
Thank you. And I agree. And it was Tim Lash, the guitar player. He's like a wizard these days. A lot of the songwriting came from him, and all of the mixing, and anything to do with the sonics of it. I mean, he basically mixed the record in his living room.
Wow.
And kind of learned as he went, you know, going into it. He'd done some stuff, but he hadn't done anything, you know, like this. And he just basically taught himself, how to mix a record. And
wow.
He put a lot of pressure on himself to do it right. He was, hope he doesn't mind me saying this if he hears this, he was worried that all along that it wasn't, you know, going to be up to the standards that it should have been. And he was kind of, you know, I don't know. Well, I'm not going to speak for him, but I'm going to say that he's very pleased, and we all are, that it has gotten the reception that it has.
Definitely.
We didn't know what we were doing. We've never made a record before on our own. So,
right.
We were feeling pretty like, I don't know, revealed.
Yeah.
And it's just very gratifying that it's gotten the reception that it has. It's a relief.
Awesome, man.
And yeah, the Sonics are just massive. I don't know.
Totally.
I don't know how he did what he did, but he really, it's like the lows are just endless and the highs are, it's a beautiful sounding record. I'm really proud of him. He did an amazing job.
Absolutely. What kit did you use on that record? Did you just have a kit permanently set up and mic'd basically out at the studio where you were writing and recording some of that stuff?
No, it wasn't permanently set up because Matt, you know, the singer, the owner of the studio, he had bands that would come in between when we'd be there. So I'd basically, you know, drive up there, set up for the weekend, and then tear down.
Gotcha.
And the kit itself is a Jenkins Martin spun fiberglass kit.
Nice.
They're weapons of war. They're amazing. They're just the tone and the cut and the power, the dynamics. It's like there's no ceiling on how loud they are. Which, getting back to, you know, what you said about what Gerken said about playing, you know, with the Hum guys. I mean, yeah, it's a real loud band. You know, I mean, you know, really loud band. And if you don't have drums that can you know, compete with a high watt 100-watt head, and you know, if you don't have really loud drums, you're going to get lost.
Right.
It's kind of like survival of the fittest, you know. But it was a natural and easy fit for me because I've always been too loud. Like even before Hum, I've been like rim shotting everything, you know, toms included, and I don't know why, but it's just always felt good to me to hit really hard, not out of like listen to me kind of arrogance, but it's more just like that's how it feels like a rock beat should be played. Like I can't do it halfway.
Right.
I've never understood, like you look at like guys that have their toms really angled, so you just like glancing blows instead of like heavy hits. I don't know how you can compete in the rock community if you're not like basically rim shot and everything.
Right.
You know?
Right. That's funny, man. And out of curiosity, on this record, with the records that y'all put out in the '90s, I'm assuming, or tell me if not, that did y'all use click tracks then? And if not, did y'all use them for Inlet?
No, we never have. And it's not necessarily a conscious decision. We're not trying to make a statement. It's just really it comes down to, I don't think, I don't play well to a click.
Right.
We tried it once when we were recording one of the songs on Downward is Heavenward. There's a song Green to Me. It's just a really sort of standard, ordinary pop song with no time changes. So we figured we'd try a click and see how it went. And it was silly. It was laughable. Like we tried for like, I don't know, 3 minutes and then just stopped because everybody was just laughing too hard. It just felt, it felt really, really wrong. For good or bad, like for whatever reason, the way that I play is like really behind the beat, like almost ridiculously too far behind the beat.
Yeah.
And it's kind of painful to listen to sometimes when I just like solo up like the drums and the guitars. I was like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. But when it's all working together, and primarily thanks, I think, to Jeff, the bass player, he's kind of like this weird glue that makes it all work. But for whatever reason, the way that I feel time doesn't really work well with a click. And I actually, as an embarrassing admission, I tried to sit in with Spotlights a couple of years ago because Chris, their drummer, couldn't make some shows, and I'm a huge fan. And reached out to Mario, and I'm like, hey man, I would love to sit in with you if I could. Mario and Sarah, they were so nice. They're like, of course, let's try it out. And I just couldn't. I can't play, because they've got some. They've got clicks. They play to a helix on stage because they've got some other things going on. And I just don't have. I don't know. I don't know if it's old school or low IQ or what it is. But for whatever reason, I can't function to a constant click, which is nice because I can do the Chamberlin thing where you kind of push and you pull, and a lot of music breathes organically like that.
Right.
But live by the sword, die by the sword, because sometimes I speed up when I shouldn't. Sometimes I usually slow down, when I shouldn't. So
yeah.
But yeah, that's a long answer to your question. We've never used a click. We tried, and it just doesn't. I just can't do it. It doesn't feel right.
Right on. That's funny you mentioned Spotlights, because when I first heard the new Inlet record, I was like, oh, wow, I wonder if Mario Quintero produced this. It really had a sonic nature that reminded me of the Spotlights records as well. So shout out to Sarah, Mario, and Chris of Spotlights. I'm a fan of that band as well, and friends.
Oh, yeah, there's some that's like just such a tremendous band and such nice people. I mean, the first time I heard Title, it just blew me away. I couldn't even believe it. That song, Joseph, like Walls, like all of it.
Yeah.
Just so massive.
Totally.
And yeah, to be compared to that is pretty flattering because they're doing it right.
Well, going back to the early 90s, I mean, I believe you were in the band in 90. I know you put out your first record in 91. It's crazy to think 30 years later you putting out a record, man.
Yeah, tell me about it.
I know. But I guess, having spoken to some of the 90s drummers that I loved, guys like Adam Wade of Jawbox and Shudder to Think, and John Stanier, and Rock Savage of Barkmark, and Vinny of Unsane. I love to talk to bands from that time about both the local scene that they came from and some of the bands that both influenced your band in this instance, and maybe even some of the bands that y'all toured with that you really enjoyed. So I guess taking it back to when you first joined the band, what was going on locally, or was it more of a Chicago scene, or was there a scene where y'all were based out of? What was that all about?
We formed in Champaigne, which is a college town. Mm-hmm. And honestly, like before Hum, for me, I was more of a typical just major label meathead. It's still the case. Bonham and Copeland and of course Neil Peart, Alex Van Halen. I don't think Alex Van Halen gets his righteous props in the rock drumming community. And that guy, he really did it right. So I came from more of like the mainstream, rock background. I mostly Neil Peart. I mean, I used Peart shampoo, and it wasn't even like spelled the same. But I was just for a couple of years, all I did was listen to Rush. But then anyway, in college, I was just drumming one day with the window open, and Matt, in Hum, and another guy who's no longer in the band, heard me through the window and ended up coming over, and they needed a drummer. And anyway, start to get into Hum, and then this whole new world opened up that I had no awareness of. learn about like Slint and Jesus Lizard and Bitch Magnet. And it's like, oh my God, these drummers, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I honestly, I wasn't like a cool indie rock dude, and still am not, but being with those guys and getting exposed, even to Dinosaur and stuff it's just so great to have the background of the typical, metal rock stuff, and then have this new door open up, and first time hearing Mac on lyre, like playing Gladiator, and first time hearing Brit and Spiderland. I mean, Jesus Christ. I didn't shut my mind to the major label stuff or the indie stuff. I kind of like an equal opportunity guy when it comes to inspirations. So, Arrested from Bitch Magnet is as important to me as, Stuart Copeland. And I think I've kind of benefited from that because there are a lot of great drummers out there. And if you shut off to everybody that sells a ton of records, you're going to miss a lot of great drummers. Tommy Lee, I think Tommy Lee, one of the best rock drummers of, ever.
Yeah, he's awesome.
But, oh my God. But if you're punk rock only, they're going to dismiss him because, he sleeps with supermodel and stuff. I mean, that's pretty gross, but I guess it's not that gross.
Not that gross.
So yeah, I was just thinking about this not that long ago. I wish that I had saved all my modern drummers from like all the years. I was just such a geek. Yeah. I would just like read these things like cover to cover, like all the ads and all the interviews and all the everything. I mean, drums, they were just everything to me for so many years. And I kind of miss that. You get older and, kids and jobs and there's a certain amount of, I think, I don't know, just emotional shifting that you do where, honestly, you lose, I think for me, you lose a little bit of like the passion that drives you to be so connected to your instrument. And it's on one level sad, but it's also just inevitable. You can only say that only in your teenage years and like 20s can you afford to just be fully committed to one thing, and then other stuff creeps in. But I'm glad that the hum thing happened when it did, because it was like a perfect fit. I got to drum like a heavy metal meathead with a bunch of really talented guys who did come from that background, and I think the combination worked. Yeah. And for whatever reason.
Right.
Now the other guys in the band might disagree, but for me it's been great.
That's awesome, man. What were some of the bands that y'all were in some of those early tours and whatnot that y'all did? Were there any bands that y'all were really digging that y'all played with, or that you remember feeling as though maybe were kindred spirits back in the day?
Yeah, lots. The one that comes to top of mind was the Poster Children. They were also a Champaigne band.
Nice.
They kind of did things on their own. I believe they signed to Sire. I could be wrong about that. But anyway, they're Champaigne stalwarts, and they've had a few drummers through the years, but we went out with them early on when they were touring behind a record called Tool of the Man, and their drummer at the time was known as Johnny Machine. Since then, he's gone to John Herndon. He's the Tortoise guy, one of the two drummers in Tortoise. But back long ago, he was playing with the Poster Children, and God, every night I was just like fanboy, right up side stage, just watching every move.
Wow.
And it was probably annoying as hell for him. He's like, this guy's like creeping me out, but such a great band. And he was such an amazing, at that time, kind of, a heavier rock drummer. He's shown a lot more finesse and depth and stuff in Tortoise, and he did in the Poster Kids too, but man, huge influence, early on, and as a band and also as a drummer. And then also, one of the other drummers that the Poster Children had is Bob Rising, who went on to play with Seam and some other bands. And he was just a monster. He was so damn good. The Champaigne music scene was pretty exceptional. There's another band, Love Cup, that we played a lot of shows with. Nice. That we tried to get signed once we were on RCA. We tried to, get them signed, but it didn't work out. But it's a silly thing to say, but it was kind of like a Seattle thing for us. Like there were so many great bands in Champaigne when Hum was doing, our thing, that we just felt like one of many.
Yeah.
it felt in some ways a little bit weird that we got some attention and other bands didn't, because we're kind of like looking around like, well, what about them? What about them? What,
Right.
It just seemed like a lot of bands should have come from that. But, and then another band that we played with earlier on that made a huge impact was a band called Heroic Doses with Ryan Rapsis on drums. And that is just a magician on the drums, just so damn good. And Nick McCree, who played bass, he ended up playing a little bit with the Fire Theft, the Sunny Day, the thing that rose up out of the ashes,
I love that
Sunny
record.
Day and all
Yeah.
that. So, so good. Goldsmith is such a great drummer.
So
God,
awesome. Jesus.
the space that he leaves in. Yeah. So, we played with them. Then, a couple shows with the Pumpkins, right after Gish came out, and that was ridiculous.
Awesome.
Watching Chamberlin and it's
Oh yeah.
funny. We opened for them on the right when Gish came out. They came down to play a show in Champaigne, because Chicago's only 3 hours north of where we were at.
Yeah.
And we got the opening spot. Chamberlain, I don't think he wanted to strike his drums after sound check. He would have rather left him up. It was a small stage.
Yeah.
And they just asked if I wanted to use his kit, to just save grief and time. I'm like, well, maybe. Let me check it out. I went and sat back there, and there's just no way. I sit super low. I'm pretty much on the ground. It's kind of silly. I look like Jabba the Hutt. But it's just how I feel best. It's just like it feels heavier to me to sit low.
Yeah.
And he sits really high. So I went to sit behind his kit, and it just felt like I was standing up. It felt like I was in like a Stray Cats or something. It was
that's hilarious.
Really odd. Really odd, but God, seeing him from like 10 feet away, side stage right after Gish came out, that lethal. I mean, just razor sharp.
Yeah.
Chops on that dude is just monstrous.
That's awesome, man. Well, yeah, absolutely incredible drummer for sure, man. In those early days, do you look back and are reminded of any particularly strange show that y'all played? And that could be for a myriad of reasons, whether it be strange crowds or just, locations or the venue or equipment meltdowns. Are there any shows in those early years that you reflect upon as being especially kind of ridiculous?
Nothing stands out like as a single show, but I can say that a lot of the shows we played earlier on were, to put it kindly, sparsely attended. Like we played shows for, 4 people and the bar staff, and I'm not exaggerating. We booked our own tours and drove around in a crappy van, and you're playing a Tuesday night in Pensacola, Florida for 10 people. And I got to say, and this is not like fake humility or meant to sound adorable, it's true. I think those are some of my and some of our best shows, because it's weird. You're like more connected when there are so few people there. It's like you can't. It's not diluted. It's very direct. You're playing a show. It's like you're playing a private show for a couple of people, and it's like being under this weird, intimate microscope. I miss playing small shows, and again, that's not like me trying to sound artificially humble. It's just true. Like, I think small shows, like basement shows, house parties,
right?
Those are some of my most memorable shows.
Yeah.
And the opposite is, like we opened up for Bush on, for about a month. You're playing for whatever, thousands of people. And it almost feels like, there's no difference between a shitty show and a good show. Like, it just gets so diluted through a big PA and a big hall, and you're so far away, and there's this big barrier between the big, security barrier between you and the first row. Mm-hmm. So what's memorable to me about the earlier stuff is that it was small and intimate, and I think we were like in some ways a better band because of it.
Wow.
It's a great way to kind of get your act together. But as far as like equipment nightmares, like I never really had any, because I'm kind of organized and uptight, and I always, double check everything, and I have extra wing nuts.
Impressive.
I never really had any major breakdowns, except I, broke a kick head once or twice, and that's kind of a nightmare. And you got to finish stuff out playing the floor time instead of the kick, and then try and borrow one from the opening band or the main band. But to this day, I still have nightmares about something like that happening on stage. Like, it's a typical nightmare to, like, you forget your locker combination, or your teeth are falling out, or you're naked in public, or, there's some cliche nightmares that people have. But for me, it's like my kick drum falling off the front of the riser. Or I can't reach my cymbals for some reason. Like just like these drum anxiety nightmares where something about your kit doesn't work out.
Wow.
But in real life, it like hardly ever happened.
That's amazing.
Maybe because because I had nightmares about it. But I learned earlier on that I have to chain my kick drum. This is something I picked up from Johnny from Herndon, from the Tortoise Poster Children drummer. He would chain his kick drum to his throne. Yep. He would literally have a chain that he would hook to the spurs and then to the base of the throne. And I didn't use a chain. I just used like a rope. Yeah. But because I sit really low and I sit really far back, so a lot of the impact is actually going forward, not down. So I've had a few like end of song nightmares when I'm playing somebody else's kit where the kick drum is a foot farther away from you than it should be.
Oh yeah.
So I just use a rope. Now I've even tried recently to get rid of the rope and use those brakes, those kick brakes.
Yeah.
And those don't even work.
Wow.
Like for me, for some reason, I gotta rope it down. Remember that Damon Che, that Don Caballero drummer?
Oh, yeah.
He would actually he'd bring a piece of like plywood and some nails and a hammer. He'd like nail a piece of wood to every riser. Mm-hmm. I think he probably got some shit from some sound guys and stopped doing it. But yeah, we've all got our own. Do what it takes.
Exactly. Well, post Electra 2000, you signed to RCA, as you mentioned earlier. You put out You'd Prefer an Astronaut in 95. And of course, you have a pretty big hit in Stars. And now that you've had some time to reflect on it, I guess tell me a little bit about stepping into the machine, so to speak, of a major label and what that experience was like.
It wasn't as bad as a lot of bands made it out to be. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably because we signed to RCA. RCA was a pretty, believe it or not, it felt like a pretty small label. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a lot of pressure. There wasn't a lot of oversight. The A&R guy that signed us, his name is Bruce Floor. And he was just a fan. He was just a regular guy with an expense account who really, really liked the band and had some major pull with the label. He also signed Dave Matthews to RCA. So he had a lot of credibility and a lot of leeway, and they let him do what he wanted. And it felt really comfy. I mean, it felt good. And that's thanks in large part to again, Bruce, the guy who signed us, because he basically insulated the label from, doing the whatever the Tom Petty, like I don't hear a single kind of pressure. Like we really didn't get much of that. They let us do what we wanted to do. Like I mean, for example, You Prefer an Astronaut. We tried recording it one place with one person and it didn't work out, and they just let us do it again. Wow. They didn't pressure us really. The pressure that we felt was always from ourselves. Mm-hmm. It really didn't feel any worse or any weirder being, as you put it, in the machine. It didn't feel like much of a machine. I mean, filming videos was pretty weird. That was odd. That's a strange thing to do. Ain't gonna lie, that wasn't ideal. But having the financial backing at the time to not have to worry about how you're going to pay to record a record or how you're going to pay to tour. That was really nice. It kind of frees you up to just chill and, write the music and play the songs, which is of course what you're supposed to do. Yeah. It wasn't the nightmare that a lot of people make, sign into a major out to be I think it's because RCA just wasn't that kind of label back then. Right. They were pretty relaxed.
Right. Well, in 98, you put out your second on RCA and Downward is Heavenward. Did you notice, was that a different experience in recording it? You mentioned with the previous record that you recorded something and then, ended up going elsewhere with it. Was putting out Downward, was that an easier experience? Was it different?
It wasn't different. It was just harder. It was the same. We're kind of an uptight band. Like we don't just go into a studio and drink beers and record rock and then leave. Like we're kind of all tweakers in our own way, and we're a little bit meticulous. And me especially tend to overthink things. So recording a record is great when it's over, but I can't say it's like a blast when it's happening. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves, to not suck. And that. that in itself can actually be counterproductive, because rock it's not supposed to be, tweaked to death and worried about. You're supposed to just like let it rip.
Yeah.
But we've never been like a let it rip. Well, I'll speak for myself. I've never been a let it rip guy when the record light comes on.
Mm-hmm.
So recording is hard. It's hard to get something on tape that you are comfortable living with for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And Downward was even harder than Astronaut, I think, for that reason, because we just had like the freedom to do it the way we wanted to do it. So there was nothing in our way other than just ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So,
writing the songs and then recording them in a way that was good enough for all of us, it was just a lot of work.
Yeah.
Same with Inlet. Same. It's always been that way. But Downward was the hardest. I can try and explain why, but I'm not even sure why. I know why.
Yeah.
But there's a reason that we broke up after we recorded it. It was just, it became hard to be good in a way that was like relaxing and fun. It seemed like it became more of like an obligation and less of a passion.
Yeah.
And that's probably more for personal than, musical reasons. Like music's never been the problem. It's always been just like, standards and expectations and all that stuff, which again is from us. It's not trying to meet somebody else's expectations. Can you record something and then like listen to it and be like, yeah, that rocks? Like, that's awesome. Like, I've never been able to do that.
Yeah, I'm more of I try to prepare, at least in more the last decade plus of doing studio recordings and whatnot. I try to prepare to the extent that I kind of obsess over a couple weeks 2-3 weeks leading into it. So it's pretty much muscle memory. And generally my first takes are the ones that have the energy and that are best. And if there's something that I'm really struggling over, more often than not, it's what I assumed I would be fine with. And all the stuff that I assumed would be challenging when I went in, I had rehearsed it so much that I was good to go, and some of the stuff that I might have overlooked can become problematic. I've noticed that. But more often than not, yeah, I would say that I tend to be more of a first, second take guy, and after that, it's only getting worse.
Yeah. And, back to Alex Van Halen. That's the way that they would do it. They would do 2 takes for a day, and if they didn't get it, then they come back to it the next day. But
right.
And there are other styles of music that probably aren't like that. But I think for like, rock that has like needs a visceral impact and energy, that's the kind of thing that you can't fake. You can't force yourself into having that, sixth sense kind of, energy.
Right.
You can't force yourself into making that kind of thing happen.
Right.
Because God knows I've tried.
Totally, man. Well, you mentioned obviously Downward is Heavenward. We were talking about just, being in the late 90s, even though I guess that was like y'all released that early in 98. But the late 90s, early 2000s was especially getting strange, in my opinion, for the record quote unquote industry. I mean, I think if you look at what was being played in the form of rock on the radio, to me, it sounded more or less kind of like these redundant templates that were just being regurgitated by these record companies of what they thought could hit all over again with kind of this certain 90s aspects to it. And then also worth noting that Napster started to happen in the late 90s and the early 2000s. So then you're talking about a pretty tectonic shift within the record quote unquote industry again. So I'm just wondering, was there a feeling amongst yourself or the band that the industry and a lot of this was changing at all? And did that have an effect on it? Or as you said, was it really just life shit and everything else?
Yeah, it was definitely the latter. We didn't really break up. The reason that we stopped recording and touring, I guess that's breaking up, it was all internal. It wasn't that we couldn't fit in with the times or that the record buying public was changing their preferences. It was none of that. Mm-hmm. It was just that it became harder and harder for us to make music that we were inspired by and proud of. Mm-hmm. It just felt less special and more like work. And I guess, it's to be expected when what was your passion turns into your job and you're doing it because you're supposed to, not because you want to. Mm-hmm. I mean, only the best bands can kind of sustain or survive that kind of like motivation shift.
Right.
There are lots that can. I'm like continually impressed with bands that can just be awesome and stay awesome.
Yeah.
We had like a limited span that we could like all feel that way. So it kind of like fizzled out naturally. You know, it didn't feel sad. It didn't feel tragic. It just felt like it's time to like get married and, you know, do other stuff and get jobs. It was fine. But now here we are, you know, 20 years later, and this also feels fine to do a little bit of this again. It's like a luxury to be able to revisit those feelings, you know, after so many other things have happened. Mm-hmm. It's not the same, but it's good. You know, it's nice to put out a record in 2020. I just wish there wasn't a, you know, global pandemic and civil rights for the new century. It's crazy times.
We mentioned spotlights earlier, and then I like to point to a band like the Deftones, for instance, where they've, you know, mentioned Hum as being an influence. And I think if you look at White Pony from 2000 that they put out, that was definitely a turning point from them, and something where I can hear some of the 90s influences between both Hum and, you know, maybe My Bloody Valentine, Failure, etc. Has it been interesting for you to see how your band has been an influence to some of these other bands?
I mean, just recently, yes, but never really realized it until it is like there was a review that came out in Brooklyn Vegan a couple days ago about shoegaze that like referenced us as this major influence on, like you said, you know, other bands up to and including Deftones and all that. And it just feels, it's of course flattering and humbling and wonderful and all that stuff. Like, I feel more influenced by those bands than they by us, you know?
Yeah.
It feels weird.
Yeah.
You know, like, it really, and again, that's again, none of this is fake humility. It's just true. Like, I can't believe we've influenced anybody, and I can't believe I've influenced anybody, but it's true. You know, we have, but I have a hard time owning it. Like, I know what it took to make the music that we've made, and it's effort, it's struggle, it's insecurity. You know, it's a lot of stuff that's not like, hey, we're gonna motivate other people to want to do this. Like, this is so good, other people are gonna hear it and want to make music too. It just never has felt that way. Sure. So, and it still doesn't feel that way, even though I know it's true, but I don't know how to own it. You know, I don't know how to sink into that and accept it. It's wonderful. It's amazing. I mean, because my inspirations have meant like everything to me. You know, I'm the sum total of like all my inspirations plus a little bit of, you know, what I can't do and have to like fake. Right. And that's its own unique cocktail. So it's weird to me that other people have drawn inspiration from me and from us. But I know it's true. It just seems surreal. Totally. I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah,
you know?
I bet. Well, you had mentioned, obviously, you know, moving to where you now live some 20 years ago, and then the band dissolves, or you take a pause, hiatus, whatever you want to call it. Did you play the drums much? Did you take quite an extensive break from playing? And if so, I guess, depending on how long that was it then not hard getting back into it more recently?
Took a break, basically from 2000 to 2010, 2000. Even into the teens.
Wow.
You know, I focus more on being a dad and a husband, and you know, I work in medical devices, and that's a pretty all-consuming career. You know, I travel a lot, and it's a lot. So I never didn't have a drum set. I never sold all my stuff and said I'm done.
Right on.
But there were periods of my life where I wouldn't touch the drums for, you know, months.
Wow.
And that's not the case anymore because, you know, my kids are older, my job's a little more relaxed, so I can kind of get back into it a little bit. And, you know, to an extent, it's like riding a bike. You know, you still got the good feels and all that stuff, but it's amazing. The things that you hear in your head are a little harder to squeeze out through your hands and feet, you know, when you haven't. Because back then I was like playing to like Rush records and stuff like that. That'll keep your chops up, but I haven't, you know, done that in a while. But what's nice is what I found for myself, what you lose in whatever speed and dexterity, you also gain feel and power and taste, and maybe that's a way to justify that. It's, you know, maybe I'm making excuses and saying it's okay to not be as good anymore because I still got taste, but it's kind of true. I mean, it's kind of, because I listened to a lot of the earlier stuff like on Electro, and I'm like, Jesus, like "How are you playing so much? Like it's not all about you. It feels kind of like show offy." And but now I listen and I'm like, "Oh my God, you sound like Nick Mason, from Pink Floyd. You're just coasting on feels."
Yeah.
And I don't think I'll ever be happy with my playing, I guess is what it comes down to. But it is nice to get back into it, and especially with these guys, man. I mean, the guys in Hum, they're just such a good band, and making music with them just feels like home.
Yeah.
It's really, and that's because we've kind of pretty much grown up together, musically and otherwise. So whatever it lacks, whatever I feel is missing is more than made up for in what is there. The pros outweigh the cons.
Yeah.
But yeah, I took a lot of years off. It's really great to get back into it. Feels like home.
Amazing. Well, man, 30 years later after its inception, and you got a great record to boot, and it's amazing that y'all did it in-house, and it came out as good as it did. So, again, congrats on that, and wish y'all the best going forward, and hopefully I can catch up with you in person at some point when and if Hum comes through New York, when and if all of this shitstorm lets up. It'd be nice to catch up.
Yeah, likewise, Jody. Yeah, I really appreciate this chance to talk with you, and it's kind of inspirational. It makes me want to play the drums a little more now.
Nice.
So I think that might be what I do when we hang up. I'm standing here looking at them now. So I really appreciate this. This has been fun.
Awesome, man. Appreciate it. Have a good one, man.
You too, Jody. Take care.
All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging. Thanks to Bryan for hanging as well. Great talking to him. Love the new Hum record. Glad to see they're back and putting some stuff out. As I said in the interview, Hum and Shine are putting out new records in 2020. Bizarre times in which we live here, folks. Take it easy. We'll catch you on the next one. Crash, bang, boom.